This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/girlonfilm. Yorgos Lanthimos is a filmmaker I've gone from loving to hating in a matter of just a few films. And there's one big reason for this: his women. Greek director Yorgos Lanthimos splashed into many of our lives with his 2015 indie hit, The Lobster. It was uniquely compelling, with a dark sense of humour and rigid performance style, a wet dream for film students world over. For those in the know, of which I was not at the time, this was really his second notable flick. 2009's Dogtooth was already recognised as a work of challenging, even disturbing cinema, and The Lobster merely introduced Lanthimos and his cynical ethos to an English-speaking audience. 2015 onward, he remained a Hollywood mainstay. Killing of a Sacred Deer gave us the breakout performance of the guy from the Please 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 music video. The Favourite followed, bringing Lanthimos into the Oscars circuit and winning Emma Stone and Olivia Colman prestigious awards. After a 5-year hiatus, we had consecutive yearly releases of Poor Things, Kinds of Kindness, and Begonia. Emma Stone's presence becoming a key factor in his films. I've heard people pronounce Begonia so many different ways that I'm not really sure what to land on here. Begonia, 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 Gabagool. Lanthimos has 10 movies total, 6 which he has co-written, and 4 for which he was only the director. I'll be specifying when I'm discussing another writer, but for the sake of simplicity, the characters discussed are those of his catalogue, which is why the title of this video is Men Writing Women, Yorgos Lanthimos. Men presenting women doesn't have quite the same ring, but for a visual director, presentation certainly comes into play. Before we go any further ahead, this video is in paid partnership with Mubi. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, Mubi is for lovers of extraordinary cinema, and for those who don't yet know they love extraordinary cinema. If you want to check out more of Lanthimos' films, The Killing of a Sacred Deer and Alps are available in the UK. But if you're more interested in women by women, Mubi has a plethora of films available in its Reframing Women Directors collection. Eva Victor's Sorry Baby, Lynn Ramsey's Die My Love, Emma Seligman's Bottoms, or Coralie Farjat's Revenge. Take your pick. And you can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/girlonfilm. That's mubi.com/girlonfilm for a whole month of great cinema for free. I feel there are 3 key types of women that have littered themselves across Lanthimos' filmography. I name them thus: the emotionless woman, the powerful woman, and the naive woman. Let's begin with our cold fish. Anna Murphy in Killing of a Sacred Deer, all the women in Kinds of Kindness, and The Lobster. These characters are stiff, awkward, barely behaving like humans at all. And for some reason my script says, nearly behaving like Roman humans at all. Now, this is the style that Lanthimos is typically known for, born of his collaborations with Yorgos Kakannakis, Lakis Lazopoulos, and most significantly, Athemius Philippou. In these films, gender plays almost no role in characterization, even if it does play a role in plot. Men and women all act in the same stilted way. No group is more or less cruel, more or less emotional, more or less moral. In this sense, it's a little tricky to critique. I believe his choice to present people this way is so that we focus on the behaviour, the definitive truths of their stories, rather than the emotions that drive the characters. I don't find the women of these films relatable or interesting, ultimately, but that isn't because they're poorly written women. It's simply because the flat, unnatural performances Lanthimos favours don't tickle me personally. The second archetype visible in his films is far more gender-specific, that being the powerful woman, the Lanthimos girl boss, if you will. You could argue that all the women in The Favourite, one of his most complex and rewarding films, fit into this category. They're selfishly motivated, daring, demanding, and remain steadfast in the face of unpleasantries. Rachel Weisz's Sarah Churchill exemplifies this cool-headed boss woman. Stone's Abigail is more cheeky and girlish and initially naive, but calculated and driven nonetheless. It is no wonder to me that The Favourite is such a complex portrait of women, especially in comparison to his other works, because it is based on real-life historical characters, and the original screenplay was written by journalist Deborah Davies in the late 90s before it was picked up by producers who brought on Lanthimos and subsequently screenwriter Tony McNamara. It's pretty obvious looking at Lanthimos' catalogue that his most whimsical and, I suppose, fun films are the product of McNamara's writing, having also written the adapted screenplay of Poor Things. And you can see the specific brand of humour and unconventional dialogue he brought to The Favourite screenplay. Davies is credited as co-writer of this script, but keep in mind she wrote this story prior to Lanthimos' involvement, and put a pin in that for now. The lone leader in The Lobster and Michelle Fuller in Begonia round out this group of powerful women, exhibiting the same base characteristics. I hate the way I say Begonia. Why does that sound so wrong? Possibly little known fact. Begonia is actually an adaptation of South Korea's Save the Green Planet. The American adaptation was written by Will Tracy, former editor-in-chief of The Onion, also known for Succession and The Menu, who is known for his clever, quippy, cynical writing, which fits seamlessly alongside Lanthimos' other frequent collaborators. In the original film, a male CEO is tortured by a man and a woman who believe him to be an alien. This was altered for the remake, instead giving us two men torturing a woman. In reading up on this video, I did find a few people criticize this choice, some believing it highlights a desire in Lanthimos to punish powerful women. Not my opinion, by the way. Others found the female billionaire character insincere. It's a less common real-life archetype in the same way that Zendaya's character in the drama is not the typical archetype of the person who does the thing she does. In both cases, this lesser established archetype adds complications that need to be dealt with well by the script, which for what it's worth, I don't think the drama does. But Michelle feels very real, and most of us recognize that the kind of woman she is totally does exist, even if it's more common for men to be these kinds of callous monopolizing CEOs. I see no inherent issue in Begonia not reflecting the reality that there are more male billionaires, because it's just one character. He's not giving us a boardroom of women deciding to blow up children, which are boardrooms that women in real life are rarely in. Let's just say that. On to our final archetype. Right from his early career, Lanthimos has loved a naive woman. Rather like the emotionless woman, this isn't necessarily only assigned to women in his movies, Colin Farrell's David for one, but it does often lead to women in more vulnerable positions. The clearest example of this is Dogtooth, in which a father and his submissive wife raise their 3 children in an isolated environment, purposefully distorting their perception of reality. A lot of this going on today. There are 2 daughters and 1 son, but it is the naive daughters who are bribed into favors by a woman the father introduces into the household to fulfill the son's needs. When the father realizes this is going on, he beats both women, violently may I say, and allows the son to choose one of his sisters to sleep with instead. The only autonomy women have in this story is assaulting and manipulating each other with Needless to say, I don't love this, and it introduces us to a secondary element of the naive women in his films, something at the fore in Poor Things. And I have a lot of thoughts on this movie, so let's treat this as its own section. On my first viewing, without the male-made feminist critique original book context, I adored 2023's Poor Things. Directed by Lanthimos, written by Tony McNamara and starring Emma Stone, the film follows Bella Baxter, a reanimated woman with a baby's brain, grow, learn and navigate the world, with a particular focus on how men perceive, interact with and use her. To get personal for a moment, I was a late bloomer in every conceivable way, and I bloomed hard and fast when I did. Watching Poor Things, I found Bella and her naivety and curiosity extremely relatable and emotional. I also found the film depicted certain dynamics and scenarios really realistically, characters that a lesser film may have rounded out for comprehension's sake, like the brothel owner, who here is both kind and honest while being mildly manipulative and callous, or Rami Youssef's Max, whose sweet yearnings for Bella are no less criticised than the cad Duncan Wedderburn. I have no shame in saying that Mark Ruffalo once again ruffled more than my tail feathers in this role. Because of this, I was shocked to see when the film came out so many people lobbying willfully dense accusations of, let's say, child-loving towards anyone that enjoyed this movie. This was such a baffling response to me, given that there are plenty of power structures in real life that actually protect this behavior that we could be criticizing, and instead people are going after twinks on Twitter for calling Bella Baxter a diva. I'm not here to tell you you're not allowed to feel offended by this movie, but let's not die on hills made from the bodies of our own community. I'd be burying my head in the sand not to admit that there are nuanced reasons for which this film disturbed a lot of people. Reasons that have made me increasingly uncomfortable the more I've considered Poor Things critically and consumed other feminist texts exploring it. I cannot recommend Final Girl Digital's video on Poor Things enough if you want a really thorough deep dive. And what are the big issues? The heavy hitter here is that for a long stretch of the film, Bella has a child's brain, but she is also discovering pleasure, and she and Duncan have several intimate scenes throughout. The important thing to remember here is that she is not literally a baby. These are adult actors, which resolves much of the criticism I alluded to before. But the visual choices made by Lanthimos in casting, styling, and cinematography have a drastic effect on how we interpret these scenes. Lanthimos chose Emma Stone for the role. She's stripped of armpit and leg hair, although we do see bush in a scene later on. She has long, girlish locks. Her flattered chest, Bambi-like limbs, and large eyes all contribute to visualizing her in a childlike way. And because of the mental age of the character, we have scenes of her blowing bubbles and being in succession. Lanthimos has retained the image of a child, and it makes all the intimate scenes much more insidious to watch. Credit to him though, the character is only supposed to be 25, a normal age for a once married pregnant Victorian woman. But she didn't have to be 25, nor did she have to look so gamine. Bella Baxter could have been an older, thicker-bodied, hairier woman, making the child's mind side of things exclusively thematic, or I suppose psychological alone. I think one or the other, a less childlike but still 25-year-old actress, or simply an older actress, would reduce this uncomfortable dichotomy. But to look so young and thin and hairless wasn't necessary to explore the themes at hand. Every time I watch, I can't help but wonder how it may have differed in those moments if someone like Nicola Coughlan or Euphoria-era Barbie Ferreira were in the role. What we have instead is the epitome of born sexy yesterday, as I mentioned in my last video. A trope that allows for naive, girlish qualities to be housed in the body of an adult woman that audiences are allowed to sexualize. Despite all of this, initially I was fine with the explicit scenes in Poor Things because I felt the film was about Those scenes weren't just thrown in on top of a story about something else. They were crucial to it. A journey from naivety to obsession to acceptance. It reflected the reality of the way others view you when you're newly active, and the way that you might view yourself as somewhat of an adventurer who's totally in charge, even if you're not. I don't think explicitly showing this is inherently offensive in a movie where Bella wouldn't be Bella without. But that's where this becomes even more complicated. Because Poor Things is not an original story. It's adapted from Alistair Gray's 1992 novel of the same name. And the novel is largely about class inequality and exploitation. Gray's story still places an importance on intimacy and coming of age, to put it gently, but it's one of many topics. In Lanthimos' adaptation, it's undoubtedly the core. An even stranger change made in adapting Poor Things from book to movie was omitting the ending. In the book, which is narrated by Archibald, aka Max from the movie, who falls for and eventually marries Bella, the final chapter reveals her wild life to be a fabrication. Bella herself, a doctor and feminist, explains that Archibald created this fanciful story as a way to make sense of her autonomy and deal with his own shortfalls. She explains she has always been a fully formed woman and was not the result of a science experiment and global adventure. In so many ways, this complicates the book and its purpose. It becomes a book about male fantasy, truth, and perception. An adaptation with a different approach may have layered together the parallel lives of Bella, how Archibald believed she became who she is, and how she actually did. And it could still tell the story of Bella's sexual awakening. The issue is not in the nature of the story, but in decisions Lanthimos actively made when executing it. As Alex Burton excellently explains for The Cambridge Student, this quasi-Victorian woman who has never stepped foot in the outside world has inexplicably shaven legs and armpits, which aside from not making much sense, does also dampen the uninhibited, liberated feminist interpretation of the film just a tad, along with the lengthy, slightly careless treatment of Bella's experience working in a Parisian brothel that is almost entirely played for laughs. Complaints arose that Poor Things is simply yet another manifestation of the dreaded male gaze. Now, none of this would be half as uneasy if it weren't for patterns emerging in his work. But many of his films feature intimate scenes of women on women and women on men, often the naive characters I was describing before coming into play. Dogtooth obviously has female characters bribed or forced into intimacy. Kinds of Kindness has an essay scene that seems to play no role in the story, and scenes of Margaret Qualley and Hunter Schafer topless, which also play no role in the story. Killing of a Sacred Deer has the famed anesthesia scene and is filled with promiscuous, adulterous women. Kinetta involves a woman frequently posing as a victim of violent crimes, and one of his earliest films, Alps, has multiple intimate scenes. None of them are offensive in isolation, but Lanthimos does seem to constantly inject female nudity and intimate scenes or assault scenes into his films, and he doesn't do this anywhere near as much with men. Of course, there is some male nudity in Poor Things and Kinds of Kindness, but the men have the power and autonomy in these scenes. The Favourite also has intimate scenes, but it doesn't leave the same bad taste in my mouth. A good film can contain female nudity, explicit scenes, assault, unpleasant female characters. I have no qualms with any of those things. Film should not protect us from ugly topics. Fiction needn't be devoid of scandal. But it's so much more valuable as a viewer when it serves a purpose, when the women engaging in these acts have depth, when the aesthetic isn't prioritized, when it isn't only women on display over and over again. The Favourite does all that, and I applaud Davies and McNamara for its brilliance. That is to say that sexual content is no issue when done well, but it often falls apart in Lanthimos' movies when under scrutiny, mostly in its visual presentation or its purpose. A through line I'm finding in my own work here on YouTube is discussions of story ownership and gatekeeping. Who gets to write who? Where are the lines drawn in exploring things you haven't experienced? It's extremely nuanced and case by case. But what I see in Lanthimos' films is classic male auteur mode. He feels the right as a filmmaker to include frequent and questionable depictions of women in his films. So he does, just because he wants to. And good for him, but having the right to do so doesn't make it interesting or meaningful or clever. An excellent discussion on Medium by Nico Reisborg addresses this. There has always been a lot of lenience for art house/indie directors when it comes to misogyny and other forms of discrimination, because their motivations behind including such content can be difficult to work out at times. People search for deeper meanings when sometimes there probably isn't any. Lanthimos' previous works have been accepted as genius because they're obviously very intentionally crafted, and he demands that people don't overanalyze his work for risk of missing the point. His work is too smart to be explained. It's supposed to be felt, subconsciously unlocking something. But without ever explaining himself, it comes across as if explicit scenes in films like Dogtooth, Kinds of Kindness, and Poor Things are there simply because he enjoys the image itself, or perhaps because he delights in making viewers squirm. Elements of his depictions feel fetishistic for this reason. He won't provide a purpose. Now a Hollywood fixture with mainstream hits, he finds himself under a pressure to justify his decisions more publicly. And he tends to lean hard on feminism when asked about this, making declarations about how empowered his characters are. On Poor Things, screenwriter McNamara said that as a substitute for the book's plot of a man literally telling Bella's story, quote, Yorgos and I decided Bella will be the centre and driving force of the film, and the men, instead of controlling the narrative, will attempt to control her and fail dismally. I do see his point, and I think the film does critique men, but I also see the glaring irony in not just leaving the book alone for a woman to adapt one day, and in Yorgos seeking out a male screenwriter to tell this specific story. Perhaps with a woman's involvement, we would have had a story of female empowerment without the slapping and hairless schoolgirl sexuality. We didn't need those elements in order to critique the men who vie to control Bella. In a similarly delusional quote, Lanthimos said this of The Favourite. Most times, women are seen through the male gaze, so they are often shown as housewives, girlfriends, or objects of desire. Our contribution is to show women as complex, wonderful human beings. As I've said, I do think they succeed in this in The Favourite, and I'm stoked that there are male directors out there who see the importance of creating such dynamic and intriguing characters. But in tandem with the Poor Things quote, the paradox at play is unavoidable. As I mentioned before, The Favourite's original draft was written solely by Deborah Davies, but I wonder if she remained involved only because she had the rights to her own screenplay. McNamara's fingerprints are heavy, and it's obvious that Lanthimos didn't want to continue with Davies' vision alone, so he handed it over to a man, even though plenty of other women could have taken up Davies' mantle and created the off-kilter screenplay Lanthimos was after. There is a slight caveat here people may point to in that Lanthimos has consistently worked with the beloved Emma Stone. And her production company, Fruit Tree, has production credits on Poor Things and Begonia, but it's unclear what her involvement is on a creative level beyond her performances. Ultimately, my gripe here comes down to Lanthimos pushing the narrative that he's making strides in feminism with his films, while never choosing to work with female writers or collaborators. Like, literally just make one film with a woman. One film. And you will be doing more for feminism by opening the industry door to someone not born with the key than by writing a woman that you, Mr. Lanthimos, ye who is not a woman, has determined is interesting or empowered. So, there we are. I like Yorgos Lanthimos movies, but I don't love Yorgos Lanthimos. Not because he's explicitly evil or inherently problematic, but outside of his collaborations with Tony McNamara, he doesn't present the kind of worlds that I find interesting. Looking at his catalogue of women, there aren't particularly strong patterns outside of the stiff, powerful, and naive women I've presented to you. There are a few too many opportunities taken to get young, thin white women shirtless, and he veers away from highlighting any other kinds of women at all, really, bar a few bit parts in his more recent films. But I will, to his credit, say Lanthimos women are not cut and paste characters or sidelined lovers and mothers. They're specific, they're messy, cruel, complex, and these are qualities I hope to see in women on screen above false empowerment narratives and clean-cut Disney-approved idols. So why is there still a sour taste in my mouth? Well, Lanthimos always works with other screenwriters. And in 10 films, if you have never hired a female screenwriter, keeping in mind that Lanthimos didn't hire Deborah Davies, it kind of feels like you don't think that real women in the real world, the ones you could be working with, have anything to offer you. Lanthimos women exist only on screen. Their stories, told by men, bringing the meta-narrative that Poor Things sought to explore, ironically, to life. Thank you again to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching. You can support me at patreon.com/girlonfilm. And also don't forget to subscribe. Very grateful for you all for being here. Love you lots. Goodbye. Greek director Yorgos Lanthimos, oh my god, Yorgos Lanthimos. I have to say that about 100 times in this script.